All right. Hello, everyone. This is our first podcast. We will be talking about WonderCon and our panel at the Comics Arts Conference within. Um, there's a slight delay from when I talk and when people respond, so I'm going to try to not talk so fast. I'll try to hold the Italian back. So, if it sounds wonky, that's why. So, starting off, I'm Tory, and I'm here with Brenda and Jen. I'll let you guys introduce yourselves.
Hi, I'm Jennifer. They call me Jen on here. Looking forward to this podcast.
Yay!
Hi, I'm Brenda. They call me Brenda. Yeah, I'm looking forward to just sharing with you guys our love of comics.
Yay, awesome, fantastic. So, to start, I want to talk about what the Comics Arts Conference is. They call it the CAC, I call it CAC. So, either way works for us. It's an academic conference that takes place within WonderCon and within San Diego Comic Con. So we submitted a paper, a panel to them, and we were luckily chosen. So, to kind of get people up to speed, I presented on Kyle Higgins' Power Rangers. What did you guys present on?
I presented on G. Willow Wilson's Miss Marvel Volume 1 and Marjorie Liu Monstrous Volume 1.
I presented on Tom King's The Omega Men, specifically on a character named Scraps.
Very nice, very nice. So, I wrote out a few questions for us to answer. So my first question for all of us is, tell me about your writing process for this paper. What did you do? How did it go? What was your experience like writing
Horrifying.
this?
Exhausting.
Yes. All those hashtagable grad student, nightmare
Absolutely.
scenarios. It's been a while since we've been out of grad school. I have written a paper here and there for conferences, but it's been a long time since I've been in the habit of just churning out papers. So, it was hard to get back into the rhythm of writing.
Absolutely.
Yeah, for me, it was a lot of trying to remind my brain and like the muscles that my writing muscles, what this is like. The last time I really looked at a conference paper was back in November.
Oh, wow.
And even for then, I had stuff, right? I had already written part of the paper beforehand. So it wasn't like I was starting from scratch. But with this paper, I really was. So it was just a lot of, okay, how do I do this? How do I student, basically?
Absolutely.
So, yeah, it was, one of the things that when I was writing my thesis was really big for me was writing on boards, right? I would just sit in a room with a chalkboard and write on the board like entire paragraphs. And it works for me. I'm a tactile learner, so it just really worked for me. And so I tried to do that this time, except I didn't have a whiteboard. So instead I used a notepad, a legal pad, and it just wasn't working for me. And what ended up happening was I ended up drafting a lot on my phone, which is funny because it's one of the things that I hate when my students do it, and now I find myself doing it. So I'm like,
Interesting.
I can't tell my kids not to draft on their phone anymore because I do it too. So
Absolutely. Yeah. My experience with this paper was, I did my typical Tory meltdown. So every
yes,
time I
we
write
know.
right, so they know every time.
Minute of it. He shared every minute of it with us through text. Meanwhile, the rest of us are like, I haven't even started writing.
Pretty
Right.
much, yeah.
So yeah, so I have this cycle where I kind of have a meltdown because I freak out. I think it's the Catholic schoolboy in me where I'm just like still afraid of Sister Elizabeth, and I just like have to do a good job all the time, or like she'll be rolling over in her grave. And I go through this kind of cycle. I don't want to call it depression because it's not quite depression, but I go through a period of self-doubt. And then I slowly start to work myself out of the self-doubt, and then I'm like, oh, okay, I can write. Um, to kind of follow up, I guess, on this, do you guys? So I noticed this with myself. So did you guys notice or find yourself having similar issues to your students this time around with like subject verb agreement or even like plurality was a big one for me this time around. I was like, how do I pluralize words?
You
Uh,
know, it's funny that you mentioned that. The thing about, like, for me, it was the possessive, right? Because I'm
Yeah.
writing Scraps' name ends with an S, right?
Yes.
So every time I wanted to say, like, Scraps, like something belongs to Scraps, I would put the apostrophe between the P and the S, and the apostrophe went after the S, and it just became this like haunting thing. And it was a joke by the end of it with Terry because I kept laughing and telling her about it. And sure enough, when I was reading my paper during the conference, I found one of those typos. Luckily, it's not something that you can, like, when you pronounce it is not visible, right? But I
right.
saw it and I couldn't think
Right.
about anything else other than that typo for the rest of my paper.
Like going back to, you know, going back to your original question, because I think I didn't really flesh out my answer there.
Yeah.
I'm a procrastinator by nature, so shout out to all those procrastinators out there. Um,
Same.
I tend to ignore the task on hand for as long as possible. So my process that night really was, I work Monday through Friday, 8 through 5 job. And so I'm tired usually. So I need to decompress from a day's work. And so what I ended up doing was I ended up coming home, like, doing what I need to do at home. And then I just fell asleep for like 2 hours until 10. And then I just started writing at 12 because, procrastinator in me. And then I just finished my paper at 7 a.m., and my PowerPoint presentation, which is
Oh my
insane.
goodness,
So,
Jen.
But can I add
um,
something that's really annoying about Jen's process? Is no matter how much she procrastinates, what she comes out with is beautiful. Like her
Right?
first draft of anything is so much more sophisticated and well thought out than anything I could ever compose in like 20 years writing, I think.
that is,
Absolutely. Like
that is not
my
true.
paper was
We
very
both
much
get
my 12th draft and Jen's was like first draft was a more like amazing in comparison to my like
Right.
8th draft.
Don't get me wrong. I love you, but that's really annoying.
well, to be fair, I have been thinking about this paper since November.
Mm.
That the idea spawned in me at another conference. So while I didn't have the words for it, I have been kind of percolating on the idea for a while. But you both wrote amazing papers as well.
Thank you.
But yes, it was hard to write. I think again because of my you know position at work, I'm writing a lot of short emails, and it's been a couple years since grad school. So what I've been noticing a lot in my own writing is just passive voice.
Yes. Absolutely, I agree with that.
And so that's really, and just kind of passive voice and wordiness. You know, I'm a I'm I'm a wordy person as it is, but it seems to be even more so now post grad school. I know my professors in grad school would probably nail me for, being so
Mhm.
passive, you know, kind of long winded and not saying anything. So I know that my writing has suffered as a result of not being in the constant stream of writing, writing, writing.
Right, it's like a muscle. Like it's we skipped leg day too many times and now we have jello
Yes.
legs. All
I'm
right,
not
let's Oh,
I'm
do you
not
want
a fitness person, so I'm just gonna trust your know-how on that.
It's like when you put the hot pocket in the microwave, but it's a little frozen in the middle. We're
Yeah, see
Hufflepuffs.
that analogy makes sense to me. Thank you for that.
You're welcome. I speak Hufflepuff fluently. So let's move on to the
the
second
rave.
question. Oh, were you gonna say something, Jen? I didn't mean to cut you off.
I was gonna say the Ravenclaw in me is just nodding.
All right. So the second question is, what was the most difficult thing for you on this paper?
Definitely trying to articulate like these big these big ideas. I shot myself in the foot. I wrote a very ambitious abstract where I was trying to connect two graphic novels into this one central theme, which
Mm-hmm.
was, margin, like intersectional oppressions on minority chosen ones, children chosen ones. And so I really, it was a lot to bite off of. And I think, and I knew what I was doing going in because I knew it was going to be ambitious. Brenda read my abstract and also said it was going to be ambitious. And so it, I knew what I was getting into, but day of writing, it was really hard to kind of, when I was writing it, I had more sense of what I wanted to say with Miss Marvel than I really wanted to say with Monstrous. And I think there really is something to say about Monstrous in terms of, disability and how that's viewed in like post-war scenarios. But I don't think that I did a really good enough job articulating that. But I think that was the hardest part, was trying to just
Mm-hmm.
kind of make sense of these big ideas in a way that was palatable for a public audience.
Yeah,
Yeah,
absolutely.
yeah, definitely.
How
I
about you,
think
Brenda?
for me it was structure.
Mm.
One of the things I've always prided myself on, and this is, and I'm not a prideful person, but this was definitely the one thing I was really proud about myself when it came to writing. It was, I could structure an argument well. Like,
Yeah, you
maybe the
could.
content wasn't great, but like I knew how to move my audience from one idea to the next so that it seemed like I knew what I was talking about. My structure really just masked my own incompetence, but whatever. Anyway, I
You're not
that's something.
incompetent.
You are not incompetent. You are a fantastic
Thank you.
writer.
Thank you. But that was something that I actually really struggled with this paper, because usually you can rely on chronological order or like this one, but with this paper, because I was dealing with such a, I was trying to get at the heart of Scraps's marginalization, but from multiple angles. It was a lot harder for me to find the appropriate structure for this paper. And I think even when I finished it, I'm not happy with the way I structured my argument. So it's definitely something that needs to be revisited.
Yeah, for me, I had a similar issue with Jen here. I was very ambitious in my abstract as well. I originally was going to write on the entire full Power Rangers cast, all six of them, and I quickly realized that I could not write on all six of them in 12 minutes. Or rather, present on them in 12 minutes. So I had to cut a lot of the Rangers out, which really hurt my soul. But that was my big kind of difficulty, was how do I do this? And one of the big things, another big thing for me also was my paper didn't match my abstract at the end. Like, it wasn't even close. I thought I was going one way, and the research and the writing took me somewhere completely different, which happens. But
It
that,
does.
yeah, that's what I struggled with personally.
Well, if it makes you feel better, what you wrote was beautiful.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
Mm.
So, question number 3. What was your favorite part of the panel?
Um, the end. I mean,
The
because we had
the
gotten
end.
through. Um, I think no. I
You know
think
that shout out to Peter Coogan that you gave? That was pretty
That
funny.
was pretty cool.
I do want to correct myself. I know. I think that in the Q&A, I said something about Hermione. J.K. Rowling, casting an African American. It should have been British,
I see.
British
I see. I see.
African, right? I was thinking about that gaffe for the entire weekend, so I just wanted to clarify it somewhere. It's just my
You're
brain
such a
holds a lot.
Ravenclaw.
My brain holds a lot, and it gets facts confused easily. But
I
no,
mean, it's better than the alternative, right?
true. I think it's always a pleasure to kind of be up there with you guys and kind of interact with the audience. I think that's always fun. I think that's always the funnest part in the Q&A is being able to kind of build off each other's answers and responses and kind of vibe off of each other. I think that's what I always look forward to when we do these panel sessions together.
Yeah.
For me, all right. So it actually has to do with both of you.
Mhm.
So, Jen is essentially my writing partner. All through grad school, we've just kind of helped each other, just kind of like critiqued each other's work. So I'm fairly familiar with her writing process, and even whenever she's writing something, she'll send it to me and ask me like, "Hey, how does this sound?" And so I'll give her feedback, and she'll do the same for me. So that's my on that side with her. And then with Tory this time around, every moment he was like thinking through an idea, he would shoot it to us through text. And so while I it's not as detailed in terms of like he just sends us general ideas. I'm not looking at his writing. I'm just listening to like kind of reading his ideas. Um I did get to see a lot of Tory's process this time as a result of that. And so I got to see a lot of the chaos before their respective papers kind of came together, right? And so the really awesome part was sitting there and listening to them just like move us through well, actually three texts and just do such a wonderful job of explaining what like their content, right? Like Tori's looking at mental health and the destigmatization that Kyle Higgins kind of brings to the forefront, whereas Jen is looking at like these chosen children as like these well, examining the layers of oppression that these minority characters have to contend with. And so to listen to them, that was really the most awesome part. Like, don't get me wrong, I love the Q&A. That's great too. But just listening to them be the awesome scholars that they are, that was pretty cool.
Aw, thank you,
Aw,
Brenda.
thank you.
I have to
I'm
give you your
proud of you guys.
Thank you. I have to give you your credit where credit is due. A big core of my paper came from one of those text messages I sent, and Brenda clapped back with, "Well, what about what was
I did not.
well, I mean, not clap back, but you like responded." And she was like, "What is the significance of this for the real world counterpart?" And that really became a core focus of my paper, and I would have never gotten there without Brenda. So I really wanted to give her props where they are due, because it just wouldn't have come together in that way.
Oh, thank you.
You're welcome. So my favorite part was actually Brenda's paper. I know that she has mixed feelings about her own work, but I taught Omega Men last semester in my English class, and Brenda talked about a lot of stuff in a way that I had never thought about and it was I kind of had this light bulb moment when she was talking. And I'm so excited to teach Omega Men again next semester because of it. Because my mind's going a million miles a minute about Scraps versus Callista. And like it was specifically the way that they have different fighting styles and how it's very classist. And that just really resonated with me, and I really enjoyed hearing about that.
Oh, thank you, Tori. That's such a huge compliment. Thank you.
I truly, truly mean it. Um,
Oh,
so, with,
I
yeah,
I agree. I think that that was one of the I think you were contending with a lot of big ideas in your paper, Brenda, but that was one of the most thoughtful and insightful observations you made about their fighting styles. I think that's something that isn't necessarily talked about a lot, right? I think we read and we can be exposed to conversations about fight styles, but it's always exclusively male oriented.
yes.
And
mhm.
it's or like Gundam oriented, right? And it's
Mm-hmm.
never about like how these how like female character styles for female characters kind of is a bit different. It has to be viewed differently because of their play, because of these issues of domesticity and the female place, right? And so I
Absolutely.
think that the way that you were able to articulate that was really nice.
Thank you, guys.
Yeah, yeah. So we can do one or two things here up to you guys. Do you guys want to elaborate on our papers a little bit, or do we want to move into WonderCon?
I Well, I don't know. I think that I guess another question I would have for, CAC would be, what do you wish you did accomplish with your paper that you weren't able to because of time constraints
Oh.
or, presentation constraints?
That's a really loaded question. Um, Actually, but it's a very good one. There are two things. For me, on a PowerPoint level, um, match it to my paper. Um, I had a moment where I clicked and I looked up and I'm like, that's not the slide I need to be on. And so it just threw me for the rest of the presentation.
Oh
So
no.
just prepare. And it wasn't a huge gap. I mean, I just went back and it was fine. But it's just one of those things like I know that it was a problem, right? And so
Mm.
Right.
bothered me. The other thing is, don't get me wrong, I love Kyle Rayner. I think he's an interesting character to look at.
Right.
But I feel
He's
like I did
pretty.
devote he is pretty.
He
But
is.
I did devote more time to him than I originally intended. And part of it was just I needed to contextualize, right? Because as I mentioned before, I had a really strong, like a really prominent problem with this paper and structuring it, right? And so because I skipped some of the summary aspects in my introduction, I had to go back and explain some of the plot so that what I was analyzing made sense. But in doing so, I ended up talking about Kyle more than I intended. And so that's something that I need to really look at
Mm.
again so that I can mess with the paper and be happier with it. Because I think ultimately that's one of the sticking points for me. I didn't really examine scraps in the way that I wanted to.
Right.
And so
Yeah.
that's definitely something that I need to go back and look at.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, so for me, so I had to cut a significant amount, not a significant, I had to cut Zach from my paper, unfortunately, because of time constraints, and he didn't quite fit in with my argument that I was able to make in 12 minutes in a presentation. What I wanted to talk about with Zach, or rather what I had removed that I talked about with Zach, was that so in Zach's story in the Power Rangers, he is approached by Rita, who tempts him with Green Ranger power, which he declines because she's trying to stir this pot because Zach wants to be seen as a contender. So Rita's like, "I'll make you the best." Um, Zach brings this information to Zordon, and Zordon's like, "Let's just not tell anyone about that." And it really, this trauma Zach is being told to shove down, to hide it, don't tell the team, and it gets swept under the rug. And I think that has a lot to do with what it means to be a minority and to have trauma versus being white and having trauma, which is what my paper mainly focused on, was white trauma, versus minority trauma, where it's like sweep it under the rug, keep your head up high, and continue to get your work done. Don't let your feelings stop you because you gotta survive and you gotta make that money. And like right, I think of like things my things my dad has said, right, where it's like mental health issues are for rich white women, and stuff like that. So that's kind of what I wish I had more time to go with was Zach, and additionally, I had to unfortunately cut poor Trini from my paper, how she seemingly doesn't have any PTSD or anxiety and is actually quite bored when she's not in combat or on a mission. So those were kind of my two paper regrets that I wish I had more time for in my actual presentation.
I
Okay.
love that just because it brings up some really interesting questions about training, right? She's not the one having to
Right.
deal with PTSD herself. She's surrounded by men, including her people in her own family, who had
Right.
to go. So it positions her in a very, very interesting place. While she's simultaneously the expert, she's also just right who wants to just be a superhero, and so that's a really interesting conversation to open up with training.
Yes.
Right. I think that, I think, Trini and Zach, express that trauma in different ways, right? I think that in the series, Trini is very focused on trying to get Billy back, right?
Yes.
At some point in the narrative. And so she's so, I think her laser focus on that just forces her to, you know, neglect other aspects in her life, like her family life, her education, and even her friends. I think that she's expressing, this trauma in a very introverted way, in a very internal way, that's very, in line with this minority, experience, and how minorities kind of have to deal with trauma.
Right, right. And I think specifically about
Yeah.
that one breakdown she has, Billy is gone and she has to like reverse engineer like this robot arm to do stuff. And she very much is like, I'm not Billy. I can't do this. And everyone's like, yes, you can, Trini. Yes, you can. And she's like, you guys, like, I'm not being modest. Like, I am nowhere near Billy's level. And she really has to overcome her insecurities to be able to kind of bring it together for the team because she's like, I can't. I'm not Billy. Um, and yeah, so those are kind of. I wish I had the time to talk about them in my presentation, but I will definitely be revisiting this, I think, on the blog to kind of expand it bigger since I'll
Okay.
have the space.
Right.
Girl, same.
I think my regrets, and I expressed this earlier in this conversation, was just including monstrous in my paper. I think my paper could have been fine without the use of monstrous. Not that that doesn't deserve a light to be shined on either, but I think that the focus in monstrous is slightly different than the focus on Miss Marvel. And so I think those are two different papers, and I wish that I didn't try to like smush them together.
Mm. I actually liked the pairing that you did there. I think that it worked for me because I've read both. But I could see how if someone had not read one or the other, how it could kind of get a little lost in translation. But I liked the because Kamala and Micah are very different in terms of space they fill and how they act.
Their coping mechanisms could not be any different, any more
Right.
different, right, and pronounced. And yet they're both responding to very similar forms of minority oppression, right?
Absolutely.
So in seeing like that diversity of, I guess, coping, right? I think that's important. And I think that's one of the reasons why putting these two texts in conversation with each other works so well.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that was the objective. I wanted to display like two extremes when it came to, um, the minority chosen one. But I think, and while I think that's a good angle, I also think that they each deserve a bigger space, because I don't think I think my paper was more lopsided on the Miss Marvel side than it.
I think that's a totally fair and valid point.
Yeah,
Yeah,
and so
absolutely.
that was a regret for me.
Mhm.
I think that, I think what made this panel interesting was that we were all bringing in different, readings, and all kind of connected within this, minority experience. And I think it's going to be, we did the same thing in last year's WonderCon CAC conference. We also focused on the minority experience,
Hmm.
and I guess to reframe one of the questions that we got at our Q&A, what is it about, graphic novels that, helps tell our minority experience? Hello?
Hi, hello.
Sorry. Yeah, I think we were disconnected there for.
I
Okay,
think
so
so too. I think we're
Yeah.
good now. We're good now. What was your
So
question?
yeah,
okay, my question was, what is it about graphic novels that helps us tell our minority experience?
Right, that was a really good
so I was
question.
thinking about that over this weekend, and so I think one of the things that I did was in thinking about the genre, right? Sequential art is such a, I mean, it's not an American thing, right? It's something that's been around.
Right.
Men could hold sticks and draw on walls, right? But the comic book, as we know it, is very American, right? Specifically with these superhero characters. And so I think they seem to capitalize on this underdog experience that we always relate to as something that's inherently American, right? And so if we're looking at it through that lens, I think one of the things that these graphic novels allow us to do is project ourselves onto the page in a way that we can't default to other things, like Terry said during our panel, right? That we can't default to whiteness, the race or identity of any one character, right? If we draw minority experience, like minority characters, we are seeing minority characters.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's one, but I think the other part of these graphic novels, one of the biggest things that they rely on is that outsider experience, right? That underdog that comes from nothing and is able to beat the bad guy either because he's superhuman or because he has enough wit to outthink the other guy, right? And so those are things that as minority characters have to learn how to blend in and have to learn how to navigate a world that's not set up to benefit them in any way. And so because it's such a heavily ingrained part of the genre, I think it becomes the ideal medium through which to tell these stories, if that makes sense.
Absolutely.
I think for me, you know, I was thinking about this too and, discussing this with others, but I think like the graphic novel medium provides sort of is akin to the carnivalesque experience, right? And so whenever you go into carnival, you experience your youth, right? And you experience everything within the carnival and you can do whatever you want, right? That's what the theory kind of says, right? You're free to
Mhm.
express what you want and who you want to be. And then once you leave the carnival, you leave with that memory of it, but you've kind of been changed because of a result of this experience. And so I think that with the comic experiences and the graphic novel experience, that's what it allows you to do. What it allows creators and writers to do is just kind of go play in this open
Right.
space,
Mm-hmm.
right?
And that's so true of fiction, right? With fiction, we're able to negotiate these, I guess, solutions for real world experiences.
Hmm.
And so we kind of use fiction to test the waters to see maybe, hey, maybe this character, like I think about X-Men, right? How mutants were an allegory for the Black experience in America, right? If we
Hmm.
can see the humanity in these characters, maybe we can and empathize with these people who are real, right? Instead of,
Right.
which sounds awful because it seems like, well, we need fiction to do that, but I think that's what we do. One of the things that we all know was true when Will and Grace came, um, the gay community was finally seen. Right? To that show, a lot of people started changing their minds about the LGBT community, right? And so I think when we're looking at our fiction as this space to kind of test the waters and hopefully move our society a little thing that's a little more equitable, that's the joy, right? When fiction is able to.
Yeah, absolutely. I think too, I think what validates me the most when I am participating in comics and reading them is oftentimes in the gay community, we're kind of invisible. We don't really get to see ourselves in things when you think about the sheer number of straight romances you get in movies, television, books versus the LGBTQ plus versions that we get. And whenever I see it, I usually get pretty excited, and I feel like it happens a lot more in comic books, just because there's like this. It's almost like a get out of jail free card sometime with comic books, right? You can do these things. It's like, oh, it's in a comic book. It's okay. It's okay that this is happening. It's a comic book. Like, why are you getting so upset? It's a comic book. And I like that they can really play and try and experiment and see what happens within that realm. Like, because it reminds me of like Midnighter and Apollo, if you guys are familiar. They're DC characters. I think they're DC characters. They're DC characters. And they, Midnighter was getting a monthly printing for a minute there. And that was unheard of in the LGBTQ community. That just did not happen. There was no way a gay man was going to headline a comic and get monthly issues, and then they made him a bottom, which was even crazier. Like, because again, that's like, because even within the gay community, there's this like huge amount of bottom shaming, there's a huge amount of femininity shaming, and here we had this gay lead character in a more passive sexual role, and it, to my understanding, I mean, it got my money, it did pretty well, and it was just that visibility, just seeing a character that belongs to my community on the pages was so validating and just made me feel like seen. And that's what I really like about the comic
Right,
medium.
and it has that simultaneous feel, right? Where on one hand you have members of that community feel validated and seen, and then you have on the other side people who aren't part of that community are able to empathize
Right.
with community and hopefully inch us close. I mean, I hate the idea of incrementalization, but I mean, because I feel like it's not as immediate as I wish it would be.
Right.
I'm a millennial, it's a thing for me. But I think if we are able to inch closer to that, to something that's a little bit more fair and empathetic, I think that's the goal, right? And that's one of the reasons why these minority stories work so well on a printed page, right?
Absolutely.
Specifically in sequential art form, right?
Yeah, I definitely agree with all those points, and I think that the graphic medium definitely lends itself really well to kind of exploring all of these themes and experiences that come with the minority experience, but and then kind of go crazy with it, right? Experiment. And
Yeah,
yet, like,
definitely.
I think one of the fallbacks or the traps of the medium too is that it just stays on the page, right?
Yeah.
And it is a very marginalized medium and
Genre, yeah.
and so, like, we're getting these great stories, but, how much influence is it really getting into, mainstream pop culture? Like the Midnighter series,
Right.
did get that serialized run, but it wasn't popular. It wasn't Batman. It wasn't Superman, right?
Right.
And so even if we are given these opportunities to kind of share our stories in this medium form, it does stay, in the carnival setting. And it does stay on the pages, and it doesn't go further than that. And I think that's kind of the most frustrating things with this medium is that it's doing amazing things. It's saying amazing things. It's saying important things, but there isn't a lot of discussion about those things outside of the medium.
I think I'm a little bit more optimistic in that. I agree with you, Jen. I think you bring up really well, but I am in that because we do see it in the graphic novel form. I'm hopeful and really looking forward to, like, in 5 years start appearing in more mass media, right? We'll see it on TV and we'll see it in our daily lives. I mean, it's really difficult to be optimistic in this day and age, just afraid of what 3 a.m. might bring, right? But like, I still hope that in seeing this stuff on pages, eventually emerge out of the carnivalesque and start influencing the real world, I guess.
Yeah, and I think it was kind of a So it's been a slow at least in the gay community, LGBTQ plus community. It's been kind of a slow process to move from the comic to the screen, but we're slowly kind of getting there. Doom Patrol has a gay character. Marvel announced the MCU's gonna get a gay character. Things
Well,
like
I
that,
think
and I'm
about things like
hopeful.
Wonder Woman, like
Yes,
acknowledging, yeah, she was probably a gay on Amazon. The Mascaria wasn't something that happened till very
right.
recently, and so
Right.
that's
Right.
but,
I think we're making progress. Don't get me wrong. I do think
Mhm.
we're making progress, especially, post Me Too moment, post, right, with
Right.
the media kind of, and Hollywood kind of saying, okay, we're going to try to include inclusion writers, right? We're going to try to diversify our staffs and our productions, but it's all incremental. We're still not seeing a lot of movement on that front. I think we're seeing some movement, but it is very slow, and I think that's the frustrating part of it, right?
yeah,
Are
totally.
we So I think in the effort of kind of moving things along, what were some highlights for you all for WonderCon?
Outside of the CAC,
Yes.
Yeah, just
um,
on the floor. What'd you like?
watching Jen meet Scott Snyder. Are you
Me
kidding me? That was
too.
probably the best part.
It was
All right, so for all of you who don't know, which is all of you out there, Jen actually wrote her master's thesis on American Vampire. And so we've been to a number of conventions, right? And we always seem to miss him. And so this time we just kind of stood in line. It wasn't even something, it was just kind of on the fly, right? We finished our panel, then we went to the 80th anniversary panel for Batman. And then we just kind of made our way to the and Jen's like, he's gonna be here. And so we just kind of stood in line, didn't really think much of it. And then as we got closer, we're like, OMFG, this is gonna happen. Jen's gonna meet Scott Snyder. And she did. And it was just so wonderful. I
it
don't
was
know. So
beautiful. It really
right.
was. Um I think my favorite part of that moment was Jen was like, "This is what I wrote on," and Snyder was like, "That's what I intended," and it was just kind of like this connection of minds. And he asked her read it. Even he's like, "I'd love to read your master's thesis to her," and it was just very beautiful.
Right. And here's the other thing. Jen is not a person who gets starstruck. It's just not a thing. Like we've been around famous people and Jen will just be like, yeah, whatever, I don't care. And then like Scott Snyder walked by and she just kind of stood there and I'm like, oh, Jen, you okay? Like it was just a moment where it was like, the buffering thing, right? For like when you're screaming something, it was just like that moment. And then she came back and she's like, oh, did he just, okay, yeah. And it was just, yeah, it was really
It
funny.
was very sweet.
Adorable.
Thank you, guys. Actually, that was a highlight for me as well. Aside from meeting, Scott Snyder, the author of American Vampire, um, the one which was the subject of my thesis, but it was a highlight for me because of just of you two and how you were able, how you both came together for me in that moment. In that moment, Tory, you graciously gave me your copy of American Vampire, so I could get that
Of
signed and
course.
personalized. That was amazing. I think, Brenda, you stood there. I know you were tired. You weren't feeling great that day. And you just stood there for me. And then you made sure that you captured all the moments to, validate the experience for me. Because, I would have questions afterwards. um, yeah, so that was a highlight for me. I think that, I think I blacked out a little bit. I don't know everything that happened in there. I remember certain things and certain things that were going through my mind, but yeah, that was a trippy moment. I think that was definitely a highlight. Another highlight for me was, going to the 80 years of Batman panel and seeing, all of these, mainstream, like, they've had such a, these big names that have been over the Batman comics. So Batman line for a while. So we had Peter Tomasi, we had, Greg Capello, we had Scott Snyder, we had Joelle Jones and Tom King, and the author of Gotham Academy, Cooney or something. Sorry if I got that wrong. But it was really great to see them and have them talk through their processes and talk about this, legacy character. But post con, and as we were driving home, I expressed to Brenda, okay, like that was amazing, but what struck me, and it kind of still bothers me now, 80 years of Batman, and it's still, and the main writers are the ones who've had impact. It was 5 white guys, or 5, a whole white panel, and excluding the girls here too. I'm like, that's a problem. 80 years of Batman, and not we haven't had a person of color yet be the main Batman
writer, right?
And I think that speaks to the lack of diversity, right? Like, they were talking about how they go to these summits and they pitch their stories, and I'm like, that must be an incredibly white room.
Yeah.
Aside from the Asians that are, or and maybe other races that are the artists, right? And I know that, like, Jim Lee is a co-publisher for DC Comics, but that's one guy. He got into the art route, right? He wasn't a writer over Batman. And we have Dan DiDio, and we have Jeff Johns and stuff, and they're all kind of main people who are speaking for the DC universe. And even thinking about the writers for DC TV, we have Greg Bertalanti, we have, right, we have all of these showrunners, all white, and it's for me, I love Batman. Yes, I do. I love DC Comics. I love comics, but that's a problem, right? A problem that we don't have more people of color running these main titles, because I'm a person of color and I love Batman. You two are, people of color, and you love other DC characters just as much.
Mm-hmm.
I'm sure there are other artists and writers out there that would love to be over the main Batman title, right? And the fact that you have 80 years and that's your panel, I mean, they're doing amazing work, don't get me wrong, I love it, but that's a problem. And it really kind of has me kind of percolating, like, how do we address this, right? And I don't have an answer for that, but it was a highlight, even if it was a sobering highlight, right?
What was the crowd like in there? How crowded was it?
It was pretty packed.
Pretty packed.
Yeah, it was pretty packed. Yeah.
So for the people who don't know, the 80th anniversary panel was directly after we had finished presenting. I didn't make it to it. You guys were able to get in okay, though?
Yeah,
we basically ran to it.
Nice.
I'm sorry. It's just no one gets between Jen. And I don't mean that to be funny. It's just the reality. Jen loves Batman.
Right.
Yes, I do. So yeah, I think that was a highlight, albeit a sobering one. But yeah, were there any other highlights for you guys? Any merch you guys want to talk about? Comic books that you purchased or that you want to bring into the classroom, or
so
you just want to talk about?
Beyond like watching you with Scott Snyder, my big highlight was walking out of the Stargate.
That was pretty cool.
That was a great moment for you.
I came back from another galaxy, and you guys don't even know. It was great.
And you won a poster.
Yeah, and I won a poster. Actually, not another galaxy, because technically I would still be in the Milky Way. It's just another planet.
For those who don't know,
so I think a big highlight for me was, for the people that didn't attend WonderCon, there were, in Artist Alley, right next door to it, they had all of the authors that had wrote various comic books, Marvel, DC, Image, the works. And they were signing books and just kind of hanging out, and I got to meet a lot of these people whom I love their work, and so many of them were just so nice and so cool, and I really enjoyed that about, like, because I had never been to a con where the signing and the authors were just kind of chilling on the floor. They've always kind of shown up, signed for an hour, and then pieced out. And it was really cool this time to kind of walk up to like Marguerite Bennett and be like, "Hi, I love your work." And then she was like, "That's fantastic. Like, you're such a cool person." And she was like super awesome. And like Tomasi, I was like, "I love
She
Super
was
Sons."
so nice.
I know. It was so great. And of course Greg Pak as well. I'm a big fan of Mech Cadet U, and I've unfortunately I have it digitally, so I couldn't get it signed. But I was just like, I love Mech Cadet so much. Like, please keep writing it. And he was like, of course I'm gonna keep writing it. So like, things like that. It was really nice to kind of. Tomasi told me too that when I had told him I loved I brought my Super Sons, and I was like, would you please sign it? First of all, he personalized it to me, which a lot of the other people didn't do, which I thought was really sweet. And secondly, he told me, "Oh, I just turned in my final script for the final version. Like, it's done." And I was like, "No." And he was like, "Sorry." And I was like, "Why are you doing this to my heart?" And he was just kind of like, "I want to write other things." And it was really sweet. It was really sweet, but I was fangirling a little hard there.
Yeah.
How about you, Jen?
Debbie.
Um, oh, I'll just be quick. I think that, you know, I think that's what I remarked to Brenda too, was that what was nice about this con was that a lot of big name writers were on the floor. I think that,
Yes.
every con always has that, every con has that tradition where you have artists on the floor and they're available for, you to sign their work. But really we didn't, I think in the previous year to now, it was noticeable there were more artists and writers on the floor, like Scott Snyder, Tom King, Joel Jones, and stuff. And I think it had to do in large part to, 80 years of Batman. So they really
Right.
want, DC really wanted their writers to be out there and mingling with fans. And so I think that's why we got a lot more writers on the floor this time, because, they're always there. But I think it was more noticeable this year. So it was kind of nice to see all of those writers there and interacting with their fans.
Absolutely. I didn't mean to cut you
Definitely.
off, Brenda. What were
And
you going to
also,
say?
well, that was awesome. But I just really enjoyed Artist Alley this year. I got a lot of art from different artists. I mean,
Yeah.
Karen Hallion's probably one of my was there. So I got a few pins from her. But I also met this really cool artist, Kathleen Abelos, and I love her art. She didn't have a lot of the fandom that I like, but just her art style is just so, I don't know, there's something kind of mystical about it that I really like. She has a really strong control of blues, and that just seemed to call out to me. I don't know if it was my mood that day, but it was just great.
No, I think there was a lot of good art out there too. I think what I appreciate about WonderCon is that, because it is a sister con to Comic Con, but it has always been smaller than Comic Con just by virtue of its location. But we've always, WonderCon has always had really good things, like good panels, good guest stars, right? And just the ambiance of WonderCon is always so nice. People are nice to each other. They always want to like get pictures with you if you're in cosplay. There isn't, and the artists and the writers and the vendors are all super nice. So I think that, that's always been a highlight, is going to WonderCon, because I know that the ambiance is nice.
Absolutely. And as you guys had said, I mean, I think my favorite, well, I got a Power Rangers, I'm a big Power Rangers guy. And I got a Power Rangers poster that Kyle Higgins signed, which I'm very happy about. But I loved it. It was just like they're looking up at the sky, and it's beautiful. And then that Sonic one. Jen found this Sonic poster that like spoke to my soul. It's like Sonic on a track with Flash and Superman, and they're getting ready to take off and see who's fastest. And you can only see the legs and a little bit of the arms and abdomen of Superman and Flash because Sonic is so small in comparison. And it just like spoke to my soul. It was the crossover I didn't know I needed, and it just made me very happy.
Yeah.
What other merch did you guys see, grab, want to get?
I got the third volume of Backstagers, and I'm just really excited to read it.
Me too.
Backstagers is a Boom comic, which, by the way, we're all big Boom fans. That sounded funny, but y'all got what I meant, right?
Yes.
I also got a book by called By Night, John Allison. He also writes something called Giant Days that Jen introduced me to, and I absolutely love. So I'm looking forward to reading that.
By Night's in my wish list, actually. I've not purchased it, but I might have to borrow that from you.
Yeah, I think that I went birthday shopping because this is the nice conventions are always nice because all the fandom vendors are there in one place, and you don't have to drive out to like these ridiculous obscure places. I ended up just getting a lot of things in anticipation of birthdays and other kind of events. So I got a lot of artwork and small merchandise in that regard. I have moved over to a digital platform, at least for new series. So I have a lot of comic books digitally, and so even though I'm a huge Boom Studios comic follower, and there were, like for example, there were 2 volumes or 3 volumes of Power Rangers that I don't have. Because I already started that collection online, I really didn't see a point of buying, volume 6, 7, and the obscure Green Ranger one as physical copies because I don't have room for it, and it felt really odd just to kind of start in the middle. So
I agree.
I didn't really buy any comics this time around because of that, and so that made me a little sad. So that's one of the things about going to a digital platform is that you don't get to have that comic buying experience at a convention.
Right.
I mean, you could. I didn't because I just didn't find it to be prudent enough for me. So I stuck to a lot of just merch and artwork this time around.
Oh, the other thing that was great? Art supplies.
Yes.
Yeah, let's give a shout out to that booth. How great that was.
Right.
Art
OMFG.
Warehouse did some nice sales. They just $5 sketchbooks for any sizes. So that was really nice. That was something that I didn't expect and I didn't anticipate I would be buying, but
Right.
yeah, that was really nice.
Half off of Copic markers. That was awesome.
It was unexpected, and then everything sold really well. Like, people were really into it. It was like the match made in heaven that we didn't know we needed.
Right.
Right. So I think we're kind of at the end. Are there
Yeah.
any final thoughts from you two that you want to share about, your own paper process, your CAC experience, your WonderCon experience, what you hope for the future, what you're reading?
So I think I want to give a shout out to all the Hufflepuffs out there because every year Brenda and I were Hufflepuffs. We go in our Hufflepuff robes, and there's just so much Huffle love in the world out there. And so I want to give a shout out to all the Hufflepuffs out there because you always make us feel so welcomed with our Huffle hugs and our Huffle high fives and all of our Puff shenanigans.
Our secret and our secret handshakes.
And her secret handshakes. I always learn a new one at every con.
Right.
So I just want to give out a shout out to all the Huffles out there.
In that similar vein, I will give a shout out to all the Ravenclaws. They were incredibly nice this year. We tend to be like cats at a convention center and just kind of ignore each other's presence, but it was really nice. People were really excited about my cosplay, which was funny. So shout out to all the Ravenclaws. In terms of what I'm reading, I'm hoping to get back into comic book reading. I've taken a sabbatical, but I recently just finished Tom King's Batman Volume 1, so I anticipate going down the DC rebirth path again.
Very nice. I'll have to borrow that from you.
Yes. Any last thoughts, Brenda? I think we might have lost her.
We might have lost her. So what I'm reading right now, I'm currently, I have like a quarter left of Monstrous Volume 3. So I'll let you guys know how that goes for. I'm enjoying it. It's gotten better and better for me each time. I know that Jen and Brenda didn't love the first volume in the same capacity that I did.
It was a little hard for me to read, but the
Yeah.
art is gorgeous.
Oh my, Sana Takada's art is stunning, like
Right?
breathtaking.
If you read graphic novels for art, I
Oh, it's
definitely recommend.
gorgeous. Like gorgeous.
No, it is breathtaking. The intricacies of her
Oh,
art style.
absolutely.
I also do just generally recommend Giant Days just because I'm afraid that it'll get canceled
Oh
or
no.
something. But no, Backstagers is also a really good graphic novel to get into, and it's not just because I'm reading them right now, but well, yes, it is actually part of that.
Support the gays. Read Backstagers.
Right? It's such a cute ending, and that's one of the reasons why I love it.
Until it attacks you in volume 2 out of like nowhere with the feels.
Right? Oh, yes.
It's a really good series. So I enjoy it as well.
Totally, yeah. My shout out is to all the Doctor Who cosplayers. Those of you cosplaying as the Doctor, because that's how I cosplayed, or the TARDIS, or any one of the Doctor Who villains. Shout out to you, all of you. Whovians were kind of a quiet bunch, but I see you. Talk to me if you see me in cosplay.
All right. I think that wraps us up.
That sounds like a wrap. Thanks for tuning
It's a
in, guys.
pleasure.
See ya.